Welcome to a brand new episode of IDTALK for Educators Live, the show for the unsung heroes of education. I'm your host, Kwame Sarfo-Mensah. And if this is your first time tuning into the podcast, I welcome you and I hope that you return for future episodes after you love this one. And if you are a returning listener or viewer of the podcast, I welcome you back and I hope that today's episode is one that you find informative, enlightening, and of course, insightful. And just to let y'all know, this is actually the first recording that we're doing from my new home in Freetown, Sierra Leone. So I am back in the motherland, y'all, and we're gonna see how this thing goes. But it's been great so far. My family's been here for the past couple weeks, and we're just excited to start a brand new journey in a brand new place. But I'm sure I'll talk a little bit more about that as we have our discussion with our guest. First things first, if you are on YouTube, make sure you hit that red subscribe button so you can get notifications for future episodes of the podcast. And also, if you would like to make a monetary contribution to this platform so we can bring on some phenomenal guests, you can hit us up on WhatsApp with the handle $ IDTALK4ED or at Venmo with the handle at Kwame SM. That's KWAMESM. And of course, you can find our past episodes of the podcast at IDTALK4Educators.com. So make sure y'all check us out. Thank you kindly. All right, y'all. So let's bring on today's guest. And this brother right here is someone who I've been following for a while. And I don't know what it is about this podcast, but I just seem to attract all the dope educators from Detroit. I don't know what it is, but it seems like I've had at least one Detroit educator every month for the past 5 or 6 months, and I've been on a hot streak with that. So I'm glad that we have another dope one, another real one who's about to come on, and he is somebody who is as real as they come. He is an advocate for young people. He's a storyteller. He is a creative and just someone who is all about the work that we do as educators. And I'm so honored and excited to have him on. So without further ado, I'm gonna bring on the good brother, Mr. Patrick Harris III, to the podcast to talk to us about his new book and all the work he's doing at his school and community. So let's bring the brother on. Yes, sir.
What's up?
How, how we feeling?
I feel good. I will say that I'm just Patrick Harris II, but I plan to have a special
Hey,
Monday.
okay. Yeah, I
But
was manifesting for you, brother. I'm manifesting.
clearly,
I'm manifesting.
kids have been on my mind, but I'm just like
Hey, bro.
a lot of responsibility. So shout out to you for having kids and moving them across the world. Oh my gosh. Wow.
Listen, this is our second post, and we're excited to start a new journey here in our new home. So we'll be here for at least a couple years. We'll see how it goes, but so far it's been great. People have been nice, they've been embracing and loving, so we expect to see more of the same moving forward.
Yes, man. I cannot wait to hear about your experiences and what you
Yes,
learned.
sir.
Living internationally was the scariest decision I've ever made in my life, and the most rewarding experience. It really changed my life.
Mm. Yes, sir. And we're going to talk more about your international experience because that's part of your story.
Yeah.
And that's why we're here today. So, usually, what I like to ask my guest before we get into the main skinny of what we're here for is, what brought you into the education field?
Oh man. Well, I don't want to spoil too much of the book, but what I'll tell people is what I tell them all the time is that um, I am a educator because I had great educators, right? I had educators, in my home, my mother, my father, my aunts, and my uncles, my cousins who taught me things, right? I'm talking about, you know, music history, writing through wrestling storylines, eavesdropping on my mama while she's on the phone is the way that I learned how to tell stories. And so I think I've always been a very curious kid. I also had phenomenal teachers, right? Like my pre-K through 12 experience was just me being bombarded with incredible, passionate, like fired up teachers and educators. I always tell this story, when I was in um, living in north on the north end of Detroit. I used to go and pick up my cousins at William C. Loving Elementary School. And all of my cousins had this teacher. Her name was Mrs. Willette. And I wish that I could have her, but I was only 3 or 4 at the time, and I wasn't quite eligible for preschool yet. And so I'm just like, man, like I really want to come, and I used to cry and cry when I used to drop him off and pick him up and I couldn't come inside the building. And then one day Mrs. Willette allowed me. I don't know how she did it. I don't know how she snuck me in, but she allowed me to come in and stay with the kids, even though I was not eligible for preschool yet, right? And so like I've always seen educators around me go the extra mile, right? I learned how to, never give up on your dreams and your passions for Mrs. Moss. And I, was able to call the first Black person outside of a doctor's office, Dr. Beta Cook, from my marketing instructor in high school, in college, right? Like, I was able to merge my passion for teaching with a necessity for it, right? With a purpose. As I learned the just the ways in which that education can be a true key for the liberation of all people, but specifically Black people, specifically for Black queer people. And I just was able to merge my passion with my purpose. And then I went through some trauma, right? And the way in which I navigated through that trauma was teaching. It's crazy to think that, like schools can be such a place for healing, but you know before I believed in therapy, I believed in lesson planning my way out of everything. Right, like I'm gonna go ahead and I'm a work harder and harder. And so like it's just been a wealth of things. But all of that has brought me to education, having phenomenal educators, having incredible teachers, knowing the power of education as a true key point, or as a true key for liberation, and then being able to see my own human growth just by being in this profession. Um, it has brought me here, and that's what keeps me here.
And just staying on the topic of liberation, you mentioned the fact that you are a queer Black man, which I think is important to note because we know that in our education system we still are dealing with a lot of heteronormative policies, if you will. When we talk about just the way curriculum is structured, even the way our rules are structured. So I'm wondering, looking at your K-12 experience, how were you able to navigate those spaces and find ways to liberate yourself? Because I know at that time, I'm sure it was hard to just come out and just be you, knowing the heteronormative nature of our schools at that time and still now.
Yeah. I think for me, man, I really struggled a lot with that. I tell people all the time, before I even knew I was queer, before I even knew I was gay, I just knew I was different. And the only reason why I knew I was different was because people told me I was different, right? It was my close, girlfriends who told me, that I was different. It was the boys who hung out out of the windows on the bus, right? Who had some things to say. It was the whispers that I heard in the hallways, right? Like when I used to come by, it was the rumors that were spread. Um, and that was all before I even knew what it even meant to be queer, to be gay, and and when you learn it through that way, you see that as a nasty thing, as a gross thing, as a hypersexualized thing. You don't really learn about the love that we get a chance to experience being same gender loving, and so it was really really challenging, to the point where I just felt like super alone. Like I never really felt like I fit in with anyone because I didn't really see anyone like me growing up. And when I did, it was highly scrutinized by the adults who were around me, and so I was like, I don't really want to, like, do I even want to be queer? Do I want to be like just the questions that
Yeah,
you ask
right.
yourself. And so when I realized I just couldn't escape it, it was what it was. Like you begin to kind of do what you can do. Going to college gives you that freedom necessary to explore yourself by and give yourself space and room to study and to be in community with with like-minded individuals and folks who have experiences that are similar to yours. I think being a teacher is equally as difficult when you're black and queer. I get praise all the time for being a black male educator. Oh my God, thank God. Woo, somebody is solving the riddle. You know what I mean? Like we have folks coming in here who are going to add to the 2% of teachers in this country who are black male teachers,
Right.
and I think that that's great. However, when you're a black queer male, it adds a certain level of how do I say it? Just a level of stress,
Labor
labor, and stress.
and
Absolutely,
stress. Yes.
uh, because in a sense that folks wanted me to bring my blackness and my masculinity, but they wanted me to leave my queerness outside of the schoolhouse, right? I didn't belong there, right? And I heard that in so many ways, from parents, right, who were whispering, from students who would just like straight out ask me. I just never really felt like I could be my whole self in my beginning years of teaching, right? Because you just don't talk about those things. And even when I would go to certain black male teacher events and conferences, right, we would talk about the power of us, being there, of our representation, and our masculinity, but we were really afraid to recognize all of the queerness that was in the room. Um,
Mm,
it was such an oxymoronic, kind of time to be in. And
yeah.
those moments would not prepare me for the homophobia that I would face from everybody, right? In the building. And that oftentimes made it difficult for me to show up to work as my authentic self because I didn't feel like um, I didn't really feel like I had the community or the support needed, even though we're in 2022. So it was challenging.
All right. And I can only imagine the stress that you went through because on one end, you want to be your authentic self and to just be you. Um, but on one instance, you don't want to be to the point where you're tokenized within your own school and you're expected to be the spokesperson when it comes to LGBTQ plus issues. Like you don't want to be that person either. You just want to be you and just do your job. So I feel like there's stress on both ends.
Yeah,
The stress of internalizing a lot of that trauma and suppressing those feelings, and then there's the stress of having to take on this burden. Um, Probably knowing that you may have some students who went through the same trauma you're going through, and they may be looking to you to be that person where they can go to and say, "Hey, I'm feeling these things that you're feeling. Um, and I'm just speaking as a cis heteronormative male who had students come out to me before their own parents.
Right.
And I
Right.
didn't have the language to articulate, what they should do, but I just was empathetic and I just listened. And that was enough for them. You know what I mean?
Yep. Yep. Man, it's so complicated because when I say that teaching is human work, you know what I mean? Like there is no way, even though I've tried my best, to not come to school and be my full self. You know what I mean? Like I
Sure.
kind of have to. Um, and even when I don't, there's something inside of me that's like, wait a minute, you're supposed to be doing something different here. You know what I mean? Like, um, specifically, like when I think about human work, right? I think about healing and I think about meeting students where they are. And I know that like the kind of teacher that I want to be every single day is meeting the needs of younger Patrick, Like it's like
Mhm.
looking behind you and like, healing that younger kid who was misunderstood, who was talked about, who was teased, who didn't feel safe, right? And so everything I do in the classroom, I do for him. And while at the same time, I'm like meeting, the needs of my students who are right in front of me, right? Be in that space for them to come out, to process the many questions that they have, to study folks who are just like them so they don't think that they are an anomaly, right? Or that they are alone. And while at the same time, trying to create these systems and structures that make it easier for the next generation of students and for the next generation of teachers who are going to come in the door bold and excited, as we often see with younger folks. And so when I say that this work is 360, that's what I mean. Like this human work is 360-degree work, like if you're doing it right, you are healing yourself, you are working to, be an advocate and to meeting the needs of people who are right next to you, while at the same time creating a sustainable future for the folks who are coming. So and all of that sounds great, but it's exhausting as hell. And
Oh,
I
yes, it is.
oftentimes like it requires your whole body and your whole heart and your whole soul. Um, and that's why I can't do this work. I can't do this work half ass, So when I say that this work is human work, that means it requires my whole full humanity to show up every day. And that's really, really challenging.
Mm. And I think, and this is why, and we're going to talk about your book because I think it's a perfect segue into the essence of what your book is about. Because, and you and I have talked about this, when you look at so many education books, they're very technical. Everything is about instruction, everything's about pedagogy, everything's about the more technical aspects of the craft, which are important. We all have to be better lesson planners, we all have to be better facilitators. Yes, we
Yes.
all need to be classroom managers in our spaces so that we can build and forge positive relations with students. Like, all these things are important, but I think what gets lost more often than not is what you're talking about. It's the empathy, it's the love for this work, the fact that it is human work.
Mhm.
Um, and I think, yeah, go ahead.
It's a reason why we get on Netflix and watch 7, 8 episodes in a row of people's drama, right? Because we're interested in the story, right? Like we're
Yes.
interested in people's human experience. And, particularly in education, we get thrown so many tools to put in our toolbox, and we don't really get an opportunity to process and reflect on how they're going, what inspired them. Like I tell people all the time, I don't think I really want to know what to do. I think I want to know what inspired you to even think about doing it in the first place, right? I
Mm.
want to know the conversation that you had with homegirl in the copy room when you were coming up with the idea. I want to know the inspiration behind it. I want to know when you failed, right? Like I want to know what the first and second versions of the plan look like. Not
Come
not
on.
not just right the finished product. You know what I mean? Like, and that's just the world that we live in now. We only give folks the the finished product of our experiences and of our lives. But when you're in a profession that is a mirror and a magnifying glass, of your humanity every single day, I don't think you I think we gotta do something different. The
Right.
Because what those types of books and resources do, and I'm not saying that we shouldn't do them, right? Like there are some folks out there who've been doing work for a very long time, but it kind of presents a false narrative, you know almost a mathematical approach to human work, and I don't always think it's that simple. Math ain't even that simple. Um because it kind of tells teachers that, and this is what how I was trained growing up. If you just do X, this will happen, right?
Right.
If you just put up a color chart, students will see it and they'll start behaving, right? If you just fill out this template, you will be ready to rock and roll for your entire unit, you know? If you just do X, then you know this will happen. If I just send y'all to this conference, y'all are culturally responsive educators now. If I just, send you to this talk with this speaker, then y'all don't gotta do no more work. It's all good. You are ready to go. If I
Yeah.
just mandate this one thing, it'll happen. And it doesn't really help teaching to be shown as a continuous work. You know what I mean? Like all of these one size fit all solutions are just conversation starters. They're not a means to an end.
No,
And
not
I
at all.
struggle with that. That oftentimes the ways in which we look at the development of educators and teachers, it's just shuffling them through these like one size fits all professional developments one time, and we don't continuously invest in our teachers and our educators. We don't reflect on what we're experiencing. We're not honest and vulnerable in these spaces that are requiring us to be our most full and human selves. It's really challenging.
Yes. And man, you saying so much, brother. And I think the issue with a lot of our teacher prep programs is the fact that they train us in that manner,
Hmm.
and it takes away from the fact that teaching itself is an art form.
Yeah.
The
Yes, sir.
way I the way I go about doing my thing in the classroom is going to be different from how Patrick does his thing in the classroom, because guess what? We
Yeah.
have different life experiences. Our motivations are coming from different sources. Even though we both care about young people, the method by which we go about it is going to differ. And
Right.
I think that's the part that we really need to hone in on, right? Because so often when we think about how teachers get evaluated, it's all based on, whether or not you had an agenda up, whether or not your bulletin board has student work on there. Not to
Right.
say those things aren't important, but
Sometimes they're not.
what are we prioritizing?
Hmm.
when we look at performance. You know what I mean? And I think um, we need to get it to a point where we're not just looking at these prescriptions. We're not looking at checklists. We're not looking at these formulaic ways of teaching, just saying, well, guess what? These are templates, these are foundational pieces, but ultimately you got to make these pieces your own.
Yes. Right. 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 Yeah. It's the copycat game,
For
like
real.
it happens, but how can you blame folks, right? Like in some ways, like it's on us too, because we're so tired and exhausted at the times in which these trainings are happening that like we don't even have the capacity to show up in that way to ask those critical questions to show up. Nor, but because I hear teachers all the time that say like, okay, but what am I supposed to do, right? Like, what are the takeaways? What are the strategies? And so at some point in time, we gotta start showing up in a new way too, right? That's like not where the strategies, but like what does this look like for me, right? Like in my classroom, right? Like because you know we see right like what it looks like in practice. We'll practice in these PD sessions, right? But we don't get a chance to really make it our own, as you said, and nor do facilitators really create the space, honestly, for that to happen. But I also just like want us as teachers and educators to see it as an art form, right? To see it as hip hop, to see it as a free verse poem, right? The ways in which we like show up and like we teach every single day, and that just requires us asking, different questions, and being able to be vulnerable. It also just means that like facilitators got to be like very um, uh, they have to be honest about the how they like created these strategies, platforms, devices, whatever. Context really matters. Like
Yes.
there's a very famous and I'm not going to say it, but like there's a very famous like reading program that gets shopped around in a lot of black and brown schools and in a lot of urban communities. And the book was written with teachers and inside schools that are in white, affluent neighborhoods. So when people say, "What's the strategy? What's the strategy? What's the strategy?" It's just like, "What's the strategy for who?"
Mm,
It may
come
work
on.
across, from a Detroit perspective. It may work across 8 Mile, but it ain't gonna work south of 8 Mile. You know what I mean?
There you
Like
go.
it may work in the birds, but it may not work down here. Also, black children are not a monolith. You know what I mean? Like what happens on the east side may not happen, may not be able to work on the west side. You know what I mean? Like, so I think that's why I think it's so crucial. And that's why I love this book because my book is not telling teachers it's not telling you what to do at all. At all. I told you what I tried to do, and then I told you, like what happened with it, and like maybe you can take some lessons from there. But what I love about my book is that it is so deeply vulnerable about the stories that I have sort of come across these last 7 years that I've been in teaching, and what I've learned, and yeah, it's so deeply vulnerable, and I want us to keep showing up as vulnerable because that is what will make us better teachers, not just being experts.
And that's real, especially when you think about the nature of white supremacist culture, right?
Hmm.
How in the education field we're expected to just know it all. We're expected to be perfect in how we go about facilitating, how we go about managing children. Um, We have to make sure that our students are getting the test scores they should get on these tests that ultimately don't matter, but
Yeah.
that's how we're evaluated. So all that pressure is there. Let's talk about the first five, right? Your new book, the first five, a love letter to teachers.
To teachers.
And it's I love the title because I immediately think about my first 5 years of teaching and how it was a learning process for me. It was a learning curve, and how I had to grow, how I had to deal with trials and tribulations. The fact that I was let go after my first year of teaching,
Oh
over
wow.
some BS. Yeah, over some BS. And I talk about this story in my own book, Shape Teacher Identity, where I was pretty much let go by my charter school where I had been for 3 years. And that year that I was let go was my first year as a full time teacher, right? They actually gave me. So what's crazy is I went the entire year without an evaluation. It wasn't until April, mid-April,
Mm,
after testing was over, that I got my first evaluation, and it was from a board member who was a retired principal. Had never met me, had never visited my classroom, didn't even know who I was. And she conducted this low inference evaluation, which lasted about a half hour. Watched me teach my math class to my sixth graders, and then just walked out the classroom.
mm,
Um, Now, just to keep in mind, I'd already been given a contract extension to come back next year to teach.
mm,
Same sixth grade, right?
mm,
So I fast forward to June. School's out. I'm thinking, oh, I got through my first year. I'm excited. I'm proud of myself. And then I get a call from my principal who tells me I need to come to the school, for a meeting, right? And I'm not thinking anything of it. I thought it was odd that, 5 days into the summer vacation, I had to come back to the school. But I thought that he wanted to talk to me about next year, about the new class and everything. Nah, I got to the school. I went to the principal's office and he basically just said, yeah, have you seen the test scores?
whoa.
And I said, yeah, as they weren't as good as I thought they were gonna be. I was disappointed, but I know that next year they're gonna be right up to where they need to be. So basically, the board had decided to rescind my contract offer because of the test scores. And
Mm,
I had to sign a paper. So the principal slides a paper across his desk and says, "Listen, man, this is tough. Um, I know you probably hate me right now, but the board said, gotta let you go."
mm,
And I cried in front of that man. I cried because it was crazy.
yeah.
All year long, I never got any feedback about my teaching. I
Mm,
was submitting lesson plans all year long, trying
mm,
to get that feedback. Never got it. Never had I told you, only had one evaluation the entire year.
yeah. Yeah.
And I'm doing all these things for the school, like creating programs and all kinds of stuff, man. And then for it to happen the way it did, I was disappointed. I felt betrayed.
Of
But it
course.
taught me a valuable lesson about um, not putting all your trust, in your principals and just schools in general. Like, you're expendable,
Mm,
and you got to make sure that you recognize your worth. And at that time, being a rookie teacher, I thought I was doomed. So it
mm.
really did a lot to my self confidence, man.
Yeah. Wow. I'm so sorry that
Yeah,
happened to you.
but it
Wow.
worked out though. As you can see, it all worked out.
It definitely did work out, you know? And that just does not like excuse like the harmful like practices that schools with the low level of accountability often get away with, like a lack of checks and balances often does not uh, do well for teachers, and specifically Black teachers who are so like deep in the work. Wow, that's crazy. I've also been fired as well, because of a hater. That's okay though.
Yeah. But
I,
let's talk about. But your journey's interesting, man. Like,
yeah, that's a
bro,
mess.
6 schools in 7 years. You gotta talk to me about that, man. Like,
It's not intentional. I want folks to know, like, every
yeah,
school that I've been in, every school that I have like signed on to, I intended to be there for 10 plus years. And the reason why is because like that was just how I grew up. You know what I mean? Like I knew when I was in first grade that I was gonna have Miss Gaines for fifth grade math. I just knew it because she was already there for 10 years. 10 years by the time I got there. So
right.
I'm just like, listen, I need to, like be a part of of uh, of a school. I need to be able to call a school home. Um, but what I realized was that when I first got into the field or the profession, I just said, listen, if the school is public and I'm serving Black kids, like put me in the game, coach.
Facts.
That's all I need. I can make any situation work.
There you
Um,
go.
and I realized that it's a lot more complicated than that, right? Like I struggled my first, 3 4 years because I kept joining schools where my values did not align with theirs, and
Mm.
I would see it play out over and over and over again to the point where you would get to the end of the year and it's just like, what do I do? And like, do I stay here and struggle, or do I stay here and assimilate,
Mhm.
and conform to values that I think are really crucial to me being able to show up as my authentic self and as a strong educator every day? Or do I, like, continue to find the school and the journey that, or I'm sorry, continue to find the school that like is best for me? And that just meant like following the path. I will say, you know, every school that I've worked at, like I haven't really had to like submit an application and like interview like random. Like I've always been like, hey, you want to come, jump ship? You want to come and Desmond called me and said, hey, I got a position open. And I'm like, oh, I know this brother. And so every time I felt like I kept getting closer and closer and closer. And it was never an easy decision because it's like you're leaving kids, who you
That part.
build relationships with, and that will your absence will impact them the next year. That's just the truth. How many kids have we met with who say you're gonna be here next year or what? Like in September. Um, but what I do know is that teachers in this climate specifically owe it to ourselves to make a good decision, of finding us a long-term school. You know what I mean? And then being in conversation with ourselves, being in reflection with ourselves and our colleagues to ensure that we are still in the right place. And that just means knowing
Yeah.
what you value, knowing what's important to you, how much autonomy is important to you. Do you what philosophy does your school hold? You know what I mean? What discipline and behavior structures does your school have? Does that align with the ways in which you, believe and think about discipline and behavior? You know what I mean? Like, what land does your school sit on? What's the history of that place? Right? Who founded it, and when, and why? Like all these questions that we kind of have to ask ourselves before we just jump into a place. Because if we can be more intentional about finding a school to call home, then maybe we'll stay a little bit longer and be able to do long lasting work.
But you know what? To add on to what you're saying, I think the reason why we find ourselves in situations or settings where the values don't align is the fact that we don't even know what our values are as teachers when we first get
Right.
into this thing.
Right.
We're still trying to figure out who we are. We're
Right.
still trying to shape our own identities as teachers, right?
Yeah.
So we could just stay true to the teacher and you. See what I did right there, right?
Right. Funny
that's
thing is, like,
that's essentially what we're trying to do.
I feel like we know our whys, but we don't know our values. And I
Mm,
think like that's a very interesting place to be. And when I think about this whole notion of a why, I often think that we explore our whys from a perspective that is labor focused, like growing up and not growing up, but like in my first beginning years of teaching, we start the year off with what's your why? Why are you here? You know what I mean? Like what brings you here? And I oftentimes feel like people have asked me that because they want me to remember that when it gets tough. You know what I mean? They want me to remember my why for when a student is, misbehaving and the systems of this school are not going to support me. They want me to remember my why so that I can show up super early and leave super late and not complain about it. They want me to remember my why so that I can um, uh, uh, answer my emails on the weekends. You know what I mean? Because that's what your why is for, right? But the why really is an invitation to understand what our values are. You know what I mean? Like our whys is tied to our greater vision for education.
mm,
So again, when we're talking about our why, it's a conversation starter. It's not a means to an end.
right. And I think when I look at my why, I feel like it has evolved over the years. And I'm going on 3 years since being in any K 12 classroom, almost 3 years. And I could say this: I've learned more about myself in these 3 years than I did in my first 9 years.
Mm,
And the
yeah,
reason why is because I was able to get the time that I need to process everything that I went through during those first 9 years. I
yeah,
was able to reflect on all the mistakes I made. I was able to reflect on the relationships I had. I was able to interrogate some of the decisions that I made, but also decisions that my colleagues made, decisions that my principals made, um, decisions that even my students made, and really just think maybe I probably should have handled this differently. And what I've come to realize is I ended up staying longer in the different schools I was in than I probably should have. I was
mm,
in one school for 3 years, another school for 3 years, and then this last school I was there for 5 years. And the reason why I stayed longer than I should have is what you mentioned before. The one thing that kept bringing me back was the kids.
mhm,
I decided I'm going to compartmentalize all these different issues that were going on. Yes, the beef I have with this person, I'm gonna compartmentalize that. Um, the disagreements I have with my principal, I'm gonna compartmentalize that. The issues I have with the curriculum I'm teaching, I'm gonna compartmentalize that and
mhm.
just keep pushing to be there for my students because I think all of us want to hold on to this romanticized vision that we have about teaching.
Ooh,
Because when we grew up, we had teachers who were in the same schools teaching multiple generations of families for 25, 30, 35 years and never left those schools. That's
mhm,
what we grew up with. And
right.
we want to have similar stories to that. I know I did.
I still do.
And
I still do. And I think
yeah,
like that is like so hard to reckon with. Because folks will tell you, like you just want to be a teacher, that's it. You don't, like to be a career teacher is it's like what? Like that's it,
mm,
and what's messed up about it is that our system it's not rewarding that type of career path. Like I often wonder, is that even a sustainable thing? A sustainable vision um, anymore. But I remember, just like you, I held on to that as well. That's why I kept leaving. I said
Sure.
I gotta go, because if I don't go someplace else, I'm a not be a teacher at all, and that will be the biggest heartbreak for me. I would feel like the biggest failure if I left my profession altogether because I couldn't quite find this, or because I was too unhappy. I couldn't quite find my groove, and so I was like, I got to keep trying, right? Like I got to go to a new school. I'm gonna follow this person. This person's calling me. This feels like more in line with my values. And I think what I also think about too is kind of what you're saying, is that we don't get the opportunity to process our experiences because we're always worried, and this is me right now, about the next thing, the next unit, the next week, the next book, the next quarter, the next semester, and then the next school year, right? Oh, well, the next year it will be so much better. Next year it'll be this, but we don't even give ourselves enough time to process, and that's one thing I think I'm learning as I continue to grow in this profession, is like slow and deep reflection is so crucial, even in like a, a world where there's a 24-hour news cycle, where social media folks are posting consistently, right? Like folks want you to think that you need to be acting and acting now. And in a sense, we do owe it to ourselves in certain situations to act with a sense of urgency. However,
Sure.
we also owe it to ourselves to be intentional. And the only way that we can be intentional is if we truly take the time to reflect on what we have experienced, how we're feeling, and like what and where we need to go from here.
Yeah. And you have a lot of teachers who are in that space right now. When you look at what's going on with this great resignation period, right? We have a lot of teachers going to early retirement. We have teachers who are contemplating changing
Yeah.
their careers. You have teachers who just want to quit altogether. And I left right before COVID happened and all this stuff happened. There was
Okay.
no way that I could foresee all these things happening, right? But you have some teachers who are in the thick of it and they're wondering, well, what's gonna be my plan B? What's gonna be my exit strategy if I do have one, if that's the course I'm going to take, right?
Mhm.
Um, I'm just wondering, kind of like with you, because you're still in the thick of it, and I know like it's stressful. Do you ever have days where you wonder, man, is this it? Have I um have I reached the end of the road in terms of just being in the classroom? Like I might love education, but I don't like education in this way. I don't want to do it the way that is being done right now. I want to do it in a way that makes sense to me and keeps me joyful.
The hard part is that I know that the way to do me is be a classroom teacher, and so like I will fight to the death. Wait, that's extreme. I will fight very tough, hard. I will fight hard to maintain this level um, of yeah, just to remain a classroom teacher, because I know that this is where I belong, and I will not allow for systems to dictate my purpose and my mission. I told myself, I made a promise to myself that I will not burn out, and I will
Mm,
leave. I will leave before I burn out. That's my promise to myself. I don't want to leave when I burn out, because if I leave when I burn out, Kwame, like I feel like that I'm never gonna come back. But I think it's okay in the profession that requires all of you, in a profession that requires you to show up every single day that is putting every flaw that you got on display. You know, that requires your mistakes to be amplified. You know what I mean? Like in a profession where we're constantly vilified in the media, it can tear us down. You know what I mean? So
Yes.
fast. And so I'm learning balance, but I'm also in constant conversation with myself to say like, you, you you know, I will leave before it's too late because I know that I want to come back.
Mm. And I think the most important thing is that you understand who you are, right?
Yeah, right, right.
People who are able to leave and have a plan B, the reason why they're able to do that is because they recognize the fact that they are more than just teachers, that there are multiple dimensions to who they are, that they can contribute to the growth of their students in more ways other than the classroom itself. A lot of us believe that the only way they can contribute is in the classroom. That's the only way that they can see that they are adding value or contributing. But I think what this great resignation has taught us is that there is so much more that we can do uh, to really enrich the learning experiences of our children. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to be in the classroom space to make that happen. We can be very creative in how we do that, whether it's through content, whether it's through another avenue. But we have to find a way to not fall into this guilt trap that so many of us get into when we feel like we're abandoning students because the love for the work is not there the way it was at one time.
Yeah, and I think students understand. You know, like students get why teachers leave. They're not surprised by that. Like they're like, yeah, like I absolutely get it. And I think I this is something that I think about a lot, which is I wish that schools did a better job of maintaining the relationships with teachers who leave. I wish students, I'm sorry, I wish schools did a better job of not burning bridges with schools, so that teachers can, um, uh, still be involved, with students and experiences. And I just wish that like institutions did a better job of like making classroom teaching like sustainable. You know what I mean? Like whether that's like helping teachers, like get a, like funding a sabbatical so that you can take your break and process and then come back
True.
fired up and energized. I wish that they were that that we were paid more so that we can actually afford to have more time so we can just work one job. You know what I mean? So many teachers pick up part-time gigs because teaching is just not it's not paying all of the bills and allowing space and time for leisure and comfort and all of the things that bring us joy and that fill us up. So like on top of just like burning us out throughout the year with template after template and a lack of support. So like there are just so many things that are happening, that push teachers out, and I'm trying for myself to hang on tight, but schools consistently push teachers out and then act surprised when we don't when we don't when we don't come back. They're like, what? You know?
Yeah, for sure. Um, so we're approaching the hour, and we've been having a dope conversation. But I want to go ahead and just pose this question to you because you talk about the first 5 years of your teaching career, and you have plethora of letters and narratives and testimonies from different educators you had a chance to interview. I'm just wondering, given the current climate we're in within our education system and where we are currently, how do you see your next 5 years in this education space? If you could make any early projection, what do those next 5 years look like for you?
Oh man. Oh, sheesh. Well, by the time this comes out, folks will know that I just accepted a dean of students position.
Oh, congrats, bro.
Thank you at my current school. So I'll still be I'll still be teaching sixth grade, but I'll also be dean of students. So I'm excited that I get to go into administration while not abandoning classroom teaching. So like I'm really excited about that new venture. And honestly, man, like I see myself like really getting into my personal bag and whatever that means for me. Like I love horror films and horror movies and horror stories, and so I want to do more with that. I am fascinated with like crisis communication and crisis marketing and those type of things. I want to do more with that. It really for me means like doing the things that make me happy and then bringing my teaching along for the ride. Like students love when you meet them where they are. You know what I mean? Like students love
Yeah.
when you um, make it relatable and enjoyable for them. But they also love it when you are just passionate as hell about something for yourself. You know what I mean?
Yes.
Like,
Oh man.
I'll be honest, like, I'm still a really cool teacher and I still build relationships and I never talk about Minecraft. You know what I mean? Like, and like students know me as like, oh, that's Patrick. He loves horror movies. It's so crazy how much he like. Yeah, like you know what I mean? Like I show up as myself and I'm like, yo, this is did y'all see this? You know what I mean? Because I show up as human. You know what I mean? Like I'm not putting aside the things that I'm passionate about and things that I care about for this for this profession. And so like not only am I fusing what my students want and what my students are interested in, but I'm also like fusing the things that make me happy so that they can be like a world of one. And like that, I think will define my next 5 years is me continuously like developing myself and my personhood and allowing that to also make me a better teacher. It's exciting to think about.
I could see how your face just brightened up when you made that announcement, man. Like I can see that this is something you've been dying to do, and now you finally have the opportunity to do it.
It's crazy, man. Like I said, I would never be an administrator. I said I was just like not for me. But I think what has really attracted me to this position is just knowing that my school is in the midst of a transition, um, and being able to help, right, and like step up in the time of like deep pain, in the time of reconciliation and restoration. And I'm just like, yeah, I want to lead during that time period. Like I don't want to lead when when it's easy, when it makes sense, but like put me in the game, coach, when it's the fourth quarter, 2 minutes left, and we're down by 10. Like that's when I like to sort of be in, being put in the game, and that just shows me that like I love, you know, like communication. I love piloting new things, right? Like those are the type of things that like make me happy. So, and I know that because I'm in constant conversation with myself, right? And I'm in constant reflection, so that I know what's the right opportunity for me. So I'm excited for this new position next year. I'm excited for all of the things that will come for me, in this next 5 years. And I am so determined not to allow this system to burn me out because I love the profession too much.
Mm. And that's real. That's definitely real. All right, Patrick. We're gonna close out with a lightning round.
Oh, let's
So
go.
we got a few quick hitters, man, and we're gonna make this super quick. So first question is, give me your favorite three horror movies.
Halloween 1979. Um, The Shining. Um, and Get Out.
Okay, it's a pretty strong list right there.
Yeah, those are good.
If you can invite three influential figures, dead or alive, to dinner, who would they be?
God. Bayard Rustin, uh, Maya Angelou, and in a separate dinner, John Carpenter.
All right, there you go. But shout out to Bear Rustin. You know what's crazy? So
Yeah,
often we hear about Dr. King and his accomplishments, but Bear Rustin was really his right hand man through all them years. And you
yeah,
don't ever hear his name during Martin Luther King Day. You will never
period.
hear his name.
We really don't.
So shout out to him.
Shout out to him.
Yes. But Patrick, man, yo, thank you so much for coming on to the
Thank you.
podcast, brother.
Yeah,
This is a long time coming.
I'd say
And
long overdue
yeah,
for me.
long overdue, man. But I'm glad we're able to finally do it.
Yes, sir.
And please let people know how they can connect with you, but most importantly, get a copy of The First Five, A Love Letter to Teachers. How can they get a copy of your book right now?
Goodness. So you can get a copy of the book anywhere you purchase books. Barnes and Noble. You can get it from Amazon. You can call and request it at your indie shops and your small booksellers. You can get it straight from the publisher at Heinemann.com. And so, yeah, anywhere you buy books, you can grab a book. Please grab it, y'all. I'm telling you, you will not regret it. It is funny. It is emotional. Like you're gonna feel all the emotions. It is a book that has incredible illustrations and photography, and like the book is an experience, and it's like the perfect summer refresher. So I'm hoping that like folks really uh, hold on to this because I think that the book is timeless. So I'm excited about it. And then y'all can follow me on all the social medias at President Pat. Um, I'm most active on Twitter and Instagram and very accessible. You can also visit my website at www.itspatrickharris.com.
All right, Patrick, thank you so much, brother. And I cannot wait to get my copy here in Freetown. It's
Yes,
on the way as we speak. So
let's
uh
go.
yeah, man, can't wait to really dig into it. But thank you, man, and wish you a good rest of the school year. Stay
Thank you.
strong, brother. Finish strong.
Close. So close. So close.
You're almost there. All right, man.
Peace.
Peace. All right, y'all. So we're about to end another episode of Identity Talk for Educators Live. And as always, I wish you all good morning, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are in the world. And we're going to do this again another time. Peace out, y'all.